everyone. Great to see you again. And today we're going to be doing a Monet-styled water lily painting. So hopefully you enjoy this one, and we're going to get started right away. So you'll be happy to know that I actually washed up my palette the other day. I know if you've been watching any of these other videos, you notice that my palette does get quite heavy with paint. But I finished off the series that I was working on, so it was okay for me to scrape off anything that was in there and wash it off. Over here, these are the basic colors that we'll be using. Again, like I always say, if you don't have these exact red, blues, and yellows, use what you do have. I don't use black, as you know. We do use raw umber and we use whites. So it's a very basic, limited palette that we'll be using today. So today I'm working with a 10 by 10. It's a stretched canvas. I've already gessoed it. I've got a slight tint of a yellow on the canvas. When I do my gessoing, I tend to do a whole bunch of them at the same time. So we're going to start off today. I've got a medium-sized brush. Nothing too big. This canvas is fairly small. I wouldn't recommend that you start off with a tiny brush. It's going to take you a lot longer. It's always good to rough in your colors with a larger brush, and then as you go along you reduce the size of your brush. So we're going to mix up our first color, and what I usually like to do, especially when I'm doing an intuitive style painting, which is pretty much what this is, we're not really using a reference image per se, is to mix up a color that's going to be our nice bright color that will represent the highlights or the focal areas in the artwork. And I know I've said before, I keep saying I'm going to be doing a video talking about composition and another video talking about color and color mixing. I will do that. If you've done a few of these with me, you've probably picked up along the way the basics of how to mix colors and how to work on composition, because I talk about that in every video. But I will do some videos just dedicated to those as well. So I'm just going to grab some color, and I want this to be fairly loose, so I'm going to hold my brush in such a way that gives me that loose feeling. And this whole area is going to be a pond. We're not going to have any shoreline on here. So right now I'm just marking in the areas where I want to keep things a little bit lighter. And it's always a nice idea to do this, I find. It kind of gives you a starting point. You can see here how I've got fairly thick application of paint. This is going to be a little bit different style than what I've been doing with you. We're going to do a little more of an impressionistic kind of style. You'll see that as we go along, how that works out. So just kind of putting in a few lighter areas. Put another one down here. And compositionally, what we're doing is we're actually creating a diagonal with these three areas. And what that does is it helps to move the viewer's eye through the composition. Okay, so now we're going to start adding in some color into the water. So we're going to switch up. I'm going to leave that brush as is. I'm going to grab another brush that's a similar size. And we're going to mix up some blue. The blue is going to be closer to a green blue. It's because ponds tend to have more of a green blue hue to them. So we're going to grab, I've got cobalt blue, a little bit of the azo yellow, and you can see how we've got a green here happening, kind of a bluish green. Take a little bit more yellow. And then I'm going to add a little bit of white over here because I want to have a lighter option as well. And we'll take some of this and we'll move it here. We'll add a bit more yellow. So now we've got a third shaded option as well. So we'll start off, and if you've ever sat and watched a pond, especially on a day where it's not too windy, it's just kind of a gentle breeze coming through, you'll notice that the water just really kind of just sort of ripples along. Doesn't have a lot of heavy action. Ponds also tend to be shallow as compared to a lake or an ocean, obviously. So the water behaves a little differently. And again, I'm going to follow, we've already got that diagonal, so I'm going to follow that diagonal. Sort of started, I'm going to keep that going through. And it'll create a nice rhythm as we go along. When you're painting something like a pond and pond reflections that are really, they're very abstract, very, not really a solid object. They're a constantly moving object. The challenge is to depict that movement in your work. So you can see I'm moving my brush, and some places the paint's a little heavier, other places it's a little bit lighter. And I don't want to fill it in because we're going to be adding more and more into this composition. So I don't want to have a solid block. As I've said before, because I'm using oil when I do these, and we do them all in one sitting, the oil stays very wet. And so in order to make sure that we're not getting a very muddy surface, we don't want to put the paint on too thickly at first. As we go further off into the distance, it will get lighter. So your lighter colors will be fairly concentrated in this upper area of your image. I wanted to talk about when Monet did his water lily paintings, he wasn't painting the water lilies. He was painting the light and the reflections of the light and the colors that the light made on the water. If you look, he's got probably hundreds of depictions of his water lily pond. And each one is different. It's a different time of day that he would go out. Different seasons. So there'd be different reflections because the trees around the pond would have different colors, as well as the pond itself would be reflecting the flowers that are around the pond. And then the sky, if you go out on a sunny day and look at the water, it's going to look different than on a cloudy day. And different times of day are going to be different as well. So all these things take into account. Now, of course, if you've got the advantage and you've got a pond in your neighborhood or even in your backyard that you can use as a reference, I strongly encourage you to go out there and use that. And when you're painting, think about that pond not as a pond. Look very closely at the water and you'll see a kaleidoscope of colors in there. The reflections from everything that's around your pond. And that's what you want to be painting today. So right now it doesn't really look like a whole lot, and that's just the way paintings are when they first start off. They don't usually look like a whole lot. These things kind of fall into place as you go along. So as I've been painting, I've also been adding more different colors. As you can see, I've got more colors happening here. This time I've got more of a lighter blue. I'm going to push that through in a few places. If you've ever listened to other artists talk about their art when they're painting, they'll often use that language, that they're pushing something through. And really that's what we're doing. We're not painting as if we're painting a wall. We're pushing the paint using our tools onto the surface of the canvas or the wood panel or whatever it is that we're painting at the time. So now I'm going to introduce a few different colors, because basically what we have going on right now is we have the water. There's nothing in this water, there's nothing around this water. This is the water as if it was in a vacuum and there was nothing around it at all. I want to add in some contrasting colors. Let's mix up some purple. Purple is not a color that we use too often. It can be a tricky color to manage. So purple is red and blue. And if you look at what I've got here, it's quite dark. I've got the cobalt blue and I've got the cad red. So I'm going to grab some of my white over here. I'm going to mix that into the red and blue. And now we've got almost a nice little lavender. I really like that. Just going to wipe off some of that excess paint that's on this brush. I'm going to grab some of this lavender. And in my pond, what I'm imagining is there's this little lavender, be a lavender bush, Could be a spray of flowers with the lavender color. Put that in here. I'm going to put some over here as well. Like I've talked about before, when you introduce a color into your composition, you should always have it in more than one place. Otherwise, the eye just gets stuck on that block that you've created of color. And this way we've got the eye kind of moving around a little bit. I'm going to put a little bit on this side over here too. So now, in keeping with that color palette, I'm going to stick with this purple. And I still have quite a bit of the dark purple, and I'm going to darken up now the color that I have. So we've got a darker lavender on our brush. And I'm going to introduce that in a few spots. I'm going to take some of that purple again, put it over here, and this is raw umber. I'm going to add that in, and what this does, adding your brown, your raw umber into a color, it will neutralize it. So the color is still there, but it'll be more of a neutral shade, as if it's a shadow. I'm just going to dot that through in a few spots. This area here, make it a little bit heavier, a little bit darker. There's trees. In my brain, there's going to be trees over here that are casting a shadow onto the water. And so we'll still have our colors, because there's still colors and shade, but they're going to be darker, they're going to be muted. And I just want to remind you, as I'm going through any of these Learn to Paint classes that you're watching, one of the biggest reasons why I decided to do them pre-recorded rather than live is because it gives you, my students, the advantage of stopping the video or pausing the video and going back, re-watching, re-listening. Because I know the most frustrating thing when you're trying to learn something is feeling rushed and feeling like that you can't keep up with the instructor or with the class. And I don't want you to feel that way. I want you to feel that you can do these at your own pace. If you need to stop and make dinner, then you can always come back to this video. And like I've always said as well, if you find that you're running into issues, you're getting frustrated, send me an email. I'm pretty good at answering emails. If you send me an email at Eastern Standard Time between 9 and 5, 9 a.m., 5 p.m., chances are you're going to get an answer from me fairly quickly. If it's in the evening, I do kind of watch my emails. Depending on what I'm doing at the time, I should be able to get back to you. But just know that you're not alone out there. I want to help you out. I want to make sure that your painting adventure is fun and successful. Okay, so the idea of a good composition is not to introduce too many colors. And it just turns into a big jumble. So the other thing I'd like to do, I'm going to grab another fresh brush. And I want to add a little more white for the brighter areas. I know we haven't added our lilies. That'll come closer to the end. The lilies are on top of the water. You could put the lilies in first and then put the water around it. It's a lot harder, especially if you're a beginner. So I'm trying to come up with methods when I teach these classes that are easy for all levels, including beginners. And that's the big reason today why I don't want you to do the paint too thick. Because we're going to be layering on top our water lilies. So you'll notice if you are using oil, the more and more paint you start to add, it starts to get, it picks it up onto your brush. That's why I have the rag here. If I find my brush is getting too muddy, I'll wipe it off in between. You could use paper towel. I prefer the rag because then I don't have to go through so much paper towel. And the rags will dry and I can use them again. I just want to put a little bit of white over here, the top of my shadowed area. And you'll know why in a minute. Okay, so you're going to set all that down. Now, I've showed this brush before. This is a nice, soft, large brush, which normally you wouldn't use for oil painting. The traditional type of brushes for oil painting is hog's hair brushes, which are super, super thick. This one here is a hog's hair. You can see the difference in the bristles. But for what I'm about to do, I want to have a nice soft brush. And I'm going to grab a fresh rag, because I need a rag to wipe off on. And I'm going to start at the lightest area and just softly, very softly brush across. Very softly. So you shouldn't even really be picking up a whole lot of paint. Basically, you're blurring in the various colors that you've got here. And you can see sometimes I move my brush across this way, and other times I'll use the edge. Try it out. Try different ways of holding the brush, of moving the brush across. You can try it this way, although this way I find you end up putting too much pressure on. If you're going this way, it forces you to kind of use your fingers. And you come out to these nice bright areas that we've decided on. You start in the center of the area and pull out. You don't really want to lose that area. If I start pulling across it too much, I'm going to lose that bright area, because these other colors are going to get mixed in. I want to keep it there as best as I can. This is our shadowy area. And again, pull that yellow across. We're losing a little bit of that texture that we had with the thicker yellow paint, which is fine. We can put some of that back in. And as you're pulling the paint across, just watch how it's flowing. You'll see these brushes are grabbing the paint and causing it to flow across the canvas. And you can control how much that happens by the pressure. Obviously, the more pressure you apply, the more paint the brush is going to pick up and pull across your canvas. If you use a lighter touch, it won't pull across as much. So I've got my phone out today. It's not usually my preferred way of looking at an image because you've got that backlighting of your phone. It doesn't give you the true colors. But what I'm looking at more is the shape of the lilies. And certainly you can go ahead and find something yourself. Or like I said, if you've got a pond already in your backyard, then definitely use that live reference. So I'm taking, as you know, one of my favorite brushes. This is a flat brush. This one is a number 8. If I had a larger one, I would grab a larger one. Actually, I think I might start with this one. This one's also flat, but it doesn't have as quite an edge. It's a number 12. And I'm going to mix up a nice brilliant yellow-green. I'll put the first lily here. As I said, this is sort of a impressionistic style that we're doing today. So we're not looking so much for realism as we're looking for some nice textures and colors. This is just the light on that lily. And one of my cats has decided to come in and talk to us right now. Okay, and I'm going to grab some of that darker blue that we had. Just put it here. Again, keep in mind when you're doing this sort of depiction, I'm not looking for a realistic image. And I'm just going to pull in a little bit of the shadow of that lily pad into the water. So basically what I did is I took some darker color, added that shadow where the lily touches the water. And then I used a brush to pull the shadow down into the water. Get that shadow in below. I'm going to go back through the water again. Put a little bit of a highlight here on the top of the lily. The lily pad, I guess you could say, is what it is. And at this point, because we've already got on our palette quite a few colors already mixed, shouldn't really be mixing any more colors. We want to use what we have. We've got a fan brush, you can use that also. It's just nice to pull that down. Of course, things that are closer tend to be larger. get some of that yellow back in here that we had. So if you're using oil paints right now and you're finding things are getting a little bit too muddy, don't despair. There is the rule of thick over thin, so that's why we started fairly thin on the water. And now as we go, we can thicken up the paint, and that paint will lay on top of the thinner wet paint underneath fairly well. The trick is, again, not to put too much pressure on the brush and allow the paint just to naturally grab on. Switched down to a slightly smaller brush. I'm putting 3 in. You can put as many as you like. An odd number is usually a good rule of thumb. Now, I know often when we're doing these classes, I talk about where the light's coming from. And I haven't done that as much in this one, simply because with the pond, the light's coming from a lot of different places. So sometimes you've got light coming from above. You've got light coming, reflecting from the color of the trees and the flowers back onto the pond. And you're working with a reflective surface like this. There's a lot more going on. So basically, to simplify it for yourself, the best way to do it is just to represent the blocks of color that you see. Don't think of what you're doing as lilies or as water. Think of it more in terms of you're painting a color. It's no longer an object, or you're painting a shape. So this brush I've got right now has a bit of a darker, kind of a purplish blue on it. And again, I'm just kind of going in. There's areas that have the canvas showing through, which is certainly not evil in any way. But I want to go through and I want to close them up a little bit. And I want to darken some of these shadow areas. If you're finding that you don't have enough drama, enough contrast in your composition, darkening the darks is a great way to make the light areas look lighter. I'm going to take down here. This is our lily pad. And I don't want to lose that dark edge as I'm pulling this into the water. I just want to take some of that paint and drag it through into the water, just so it gives that appearance of a shadow and that it's sitting on the water. I'm just going to continue adding some more dark spots. This is when you can see the painting is starting to come together. You don't want to get too excited and rush it. Just want to take your time, go through carefully, adjusting this, tweaking that, and then step back. You've got to step back every once in a while and take a look at what you're doing. This area up here is a little bit lighter, but I do want to have some of this dark dotting through in spots. I've got this nice lighter color still on my palette. I'm going to introduce that in some of these empty areas. So you're just adding in the colors. And like I said, you don't want to add all kinds of, basically our palette is the fairly cooler colors. We've got the purples and the blues, and then we've got the cooler yellows and the cooler greens. I don't want to start adding in some oranges and some reds and some fuchsia, because this here keeps everything harmonious. If you wanted to have a warmer palette, then you need to change up the colors that you have here. You could have still done the purple, but more of a reddish purple, or even an orange in place of the purple, deep orange, and then make everything a warmer palette. So there are several ways of creating the same work. In this case, we chose these colors. If you decide you want to, after you're done this one, you want to do another one, the different palette, different colors, certainly I encourage you to do that. That's how we learn, by practice, by trying new things. We don't learn doing the same thing over and over again the same way. We stay safe, but we don't learn anything. For me, that's the best part of being an artist, is that I have the freedom to do this painting in this way today, but tomorrow I might decide I want to do another pond and do a completely different way, completely different palette. So we're just adding in, filling in our pond with our colors. We're not done with the lily pads yet. So we've extended the reflections down a little bit further. And then we're going to go and grab a palette knife. We're going to cut through the water a little bit through our reflections. We'll take the side of the palette knife across our white. We just want to pick up some of that white paint on the edge, like that. And just very, very lightly, we're going to cut across. With the palette knife. And you'll have to pick up more paint as you go, because the paint's obviously going to end up on your canvas, which is the idea. And as you can see, what this does now is it flattens your water. You've got any areas that look like there's a little bit too much paint globbed in, you just go back through with your palette knife and cut them back through. And don't forget to go right to the edge when you're doing this as well. You want longer strokes and shorter strokes. And again, I want to brighten up some of these light areas. So I'm going to grab some dark purple. And then I've got my smaller, finer brush. I'm just adding back in more darker areas. And you'll see, as soon as you do this, as soon as you add this darker area, everything around it looks so much brighter. So we're working in contrast. As soon as you add that contrast of dark, everything around it that's lighter is going to look lighter. Don't be afraid to play with the composition, and if you feel like something that you've done quote unquote ruins what you've just done, and it's not actually ruining it. This is oil paint, and even if you're working in acrylics, you let it dry, you can paint right over it, you can fix it. So don't be afraid. This is painting after all. This is not any kind of life-threatening thing. I've just taken a larger brush. I'm going to pull across some of that darker area that I've just re-added in. And a little bit too much up here. So I'm going to grab my lighter color one again and go back in. So really, you know, you could probably play with this for another hour or two. But I'm not sure how much further ahead you're going to get. I think once you get to a certain point and you can see that there's a balance, you've got a dark area, a light area, you've got your lily pads working in a nice triangle, you still have your diagonal happening here, you've got another smaller diagonal happening here. You've got an interesting composition. Once you get to that point and you can see that there's a nice balance going on, then it's time to put those brushes away. You step back, you grab a smaller brush, and you put your name on it. Sometimes it's hard to know when to stop. Especially with something like this, because it's so much fun to play around with the colors and the textures and the reflections. It really is a challenge. There you go. You've got your lily pond. So I hope you enjoyed the class today. It was a lot of fun playing around with the paints today and the shadows and the highlights and the different colors. And we've ended up with a pretty decent little painting over here. So, as always, I never know what to say at the end. I just really sincerely hope that you enjoy these videos, that you are able to learn some new skills, gain some greater confidence, and that you continue watching and learning. Thanks very much. Bye for now.